On April 30th, 2026, after spending nearly 50 years on death row, James Ernest Hitchcock was executed by lethal injection in Florida. He was 70 years old. But the reason he was there? He raped a 13-year-old girl, his own niece, in his brother's house. And then he killed her so she wouldn't tell anyone. His brother had taken him in off the street when he had nowhere else to go. And James thanked him by destroying his family. This is what happened. It was July 30th, 1976, in Winter Garden, Florida. That evening, James Hitchcock sat in his brother Richard's living room and watched television with the family until around 11 p.m. Nothing unusual, just a normal night. Then James left the house and headed into town, where he spent the next few hours drinking beer and smoking marijuana with friends. He came back around 2:30 in the morning, but he didn't use the front door. He climbed in through a dining room window, and then he walked down the hallway to the bedroom of Cynthia Driggers, Cindy, Richard's 13-year-old stepdaughter. James was 20 years old. He had been living under their roof for 2.5 weeks as a guest. Richard had taken him in because James had nothing. He grew up one of 7 kids in a shack in Arkansas, picking cotton. His father died of skin cancer when he was 6. His stepfather beat his mother. He ran away from home at 13. And somehow, despite all of that, he was the first person in his family to earn a high school diploma. But by 1976, he was broke, on parole for burglary, and out of options. Richard was the one who opened the door. And this is what he did with the second chance his brother gave him. He raped his daughter. Afterwards, Cindy told him she was hurt. She said she was going to tell her mother. And when he tried to stop her from leaving the room, she started yelling. So he grabbed her by the neck. He dragged her outside the house, still fighting, still yelling. In his own words, she started hollering, and when she wouldn't stop, he choked her again. He beat her, he hit her in the face, and he kept choking her until she went quiet. Then he shoved her body into some bushes, walked back inside, took a shower, climbed into bed, and went to sleep like it was any other night. When he woke up and noticed the family was realizing Cindy was gone, James went around trying to organize a search party to find her. He was out there playing the concerned uncle, trying to get neighbors to help look for the girl whose body he had personally shoved into the bushes a few hours earlier. He knew exactly where she was. He put her there. Police focused on James almost immediately, and on August 4th, he confessed. He laid out the entire night in his own words, step by step. How he came home drunk, how he entered through the window, what he did to Cindy, how he killed her. But even while confessing to everything, he still tried to twist the story. He told investigators that the sex was consensual, that a 13-year-old girl wanted it. But the autopsy destroyed that claim before it ever reached a courtroom. Cindy's had been recently torn. Sperm was found inside her body, and her face was covered in cuts and bruises around both eyes. There is nothing consensual about any of that. And there was something else. Cindy's sister, Deborah, later testified that before the murder, she and Cindy had confronted James about things he was doing to Cindy. According to Deborah, James told them he would rape and kill Cynthia. He said it out loud, and then he did exactly that. James was charged with first-degree murder and sexual battery. But the trial is where this story gets even worse. Less than a year after the murder, James stood trial. And here is where he showed exactly who he really was. He recanted his entire confession, every word. He now told the jury that Cindy had let him into her room willingly, that she consented to sex with him. Remember, she was 13, while he was 20. The age of consent in Florida is 18, but it gets worse. James then pointed his finger directly at his own brother, Richard, the same man who had taken him in when he had nothing. He told the jury that after the sex, Richard walked in and caught them, that Richard flew into a rage and dragged Cindy outside, that Richard choked her to death, and that James only confessed to police because he was trying to protect his brother. Think about that for a second. He raped his brother's child, then he killed her, and then, in a courtroom, he tried to frame the one person in his life who had shown him kindness for the murder. That's a level of betrayal most people can't even wrap their heads around. But the jury saw right through it. His original confession was detailed, specific, and in his own words. The physical evidence matched it perfectly. And the story about Richard only appeared after James had weeks to sit in a cell and think about how to save himself. And then there was the letter. From jail, James had written to his own mother confessing to the killing. He put it in writing, and then he got on the stand and blamed his brother anyway. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, they found him guilty. The vote for death was 7-5, and the judge agreed. On February 11, 1977, James Hitchcock was sentenced to die in the electric chair. But that sentence would take almost 50 years to carry out. What followed was one of the longest legal sagas in Florida's death row history. James Hitchcock's case went through the Florida Supreme Court, then the federal courts, then all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Twice. In 1987, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the original sentencing judge had violated the Constitution. The issue was technical. The judge had refused to let the jury consider mitigating evidence, things like James's childhood poverty, his father's death, and the fact that as a kid he used to inhale gasoline fumes from car tanks and once passed out from it. The ruling in Hitchcock v. Duggar became a landmark decision. It reshaped how capital cases were handled nationwide. It showed up in law school textbooks and was cited in hundreds of other death penalty cases. So, James got a new sentencing hearing. In 1988, the defense put on an extensive case. James's mother testified. His sisters testified. 2 nieces and a cousin took the stand. Even a psychologist who said he wasn't dangerous anymore. 8 fellow death row inmates who called him a peacemaker. And James himself took the stand and talked about how he had changed. But the jury recommended death again, with a vote of 7-5. It didn't matter what his mother said. It didn't matter what the psychologist said. It didn't matter that 8 inmates called him a peacemaker, because no amount of testimony could outweigh what he did. He was on parole when he committed the murder. He raped a child and killed her so she couldn't tell anyone. And the killing itself was heinous, atrocious, and cruel. Every jury that heard those facts reached the same conclusion. He was resentenced a 3rd time in 1993, and then the vote was 12-0, unanimous, and a 4th time in 1996 when the vote was 10-2. 4 separate juries heard this case. 4 separate times they said this man should die, and every single time James told the same story, that his brother did it, that he was only guilty of the sex, as if a 13-year-old is the lesser thing he's willing to admit to. And keeping James on death row for nearly 50 years cost Florida taxpayers far more than a sentence of life without parole ever would have. In Florida, the average execution costs an estimated 6 times more than life in prison. And James Hitchcock's case wasn't average. 4 trials, decades of appeals, 2 Supreme Court cases, and a family that had to relive the worst night of their lives every time a courtroom door opened. While James Hitchcock was cycling through courtrooms and filing appeals, Cindy Driggers' family was stuck in a loop of their own. Her younger sister, Lynn Cobb, was only 16 months younger than Cindy. She was there the day it happened, and for nearly 5 decades, she watched the case drag through the system with no end in sight.
For me, it was just felt like it was never going to end, and we just kept doing it over and over again.
She described the aftermath of the murder as a blur. Cindy's cousin, Jeannie Meadows, spent years going to Tallahassee, pressing officials for answers. She said the decades had taken a toll on the older members of the family that most people couldn't understand.
2 people in my family, at night, when they lay their head down on their pillow, you know what their prayer is? That they live longer than Hitchcock does.
And then there was Cindy's mother, Judy. After 50 years of waiting, she said something that every parent in this situation has probably thought but never said out loud. I just hope that it goes through. I hope God forgives me for saying this. but he needs to die. For nearly 50 years, James sat on death row at Florida State Prison. He was one of the longest-serving inmates on the row. And then, on March 31st, 2026, Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant. The execution was set for April 30th. After 49 years and 9 months on death row, James Hitchcock was about to face the end. On the morning of his execution, James woke up at 4:45 a.m. According to a prison spokesman, he was compliant throughout the day. He met with a cousin, but not with a spiritual advisor. For his last meal, James Hitchcock had chicken, salad, ice cream, pie, and a soda. At the end of the day, he was brought into the execution chamber, where the curtain went up at 6 p.m. James Hitchcock lay strapped to a gurney with 2 IV lines inserted into his arms. He was asked if he had any final words. He said, "Just to say goodbye to my friend, Joshua. Thanks for all you've done." Then he lifted his head toward a man sitting in the front row of the gallery. The man raised his hand, and those were the last words James Hitchcock ever spoke. Not a word about Cindy, no apology, no remorse. After 50 years, his last breath was a goodbye to a friend. The warden gave the signal, and the drugs were administered. At 6:12 p.m., 12 minutes after the injection began, James Ernest Hitchcock was pronounced dead. He was 70 years old. What do you think? Has justice been served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.